Are you suffering from sciatica because of a bulging disc, but you're still hoping to take part in yoga classes? If you are, then this video is vital for you. Hi everybody, my name is Will Harlow and I'm the Over-Fifties and Sciatica Specialist Physio here at HT Physio in Farnham. And today I'm going to be revealing 5 yoga poses that you should avoid if you've got a bulging disc. Now, before we dive into the content of the video, if you haven't already, please hit like on the video and subscribe to the channel using the link in the bottom right, because then you'll be the first to hear about our new sciatica and bulging disc videos when they come out. And if you're enjoying this channel, please consider sharing it with a friend or a family member, because you might help someone to get a painful problem fixed, and you'll also help our channel to grow. So I'm really thankful to you if you do that. Now that that's been said, let's talk about bulging discs, and specifically what we're talking about here are bulging discs in the lower back or the lumbar spine. And this is a very common type of back injury. We deal with it all the time in the clinic, and typically what it causes are symptoms such as back pain and sciatica, which is a nerve pain that runs down the leg. Bulging discs can also cause pins and needles and numbness, and they can also cause weakness in the leg as well. And if you go online and you type in rehabilitation for bulging discs or bulging disc exercises, a lot of the exercises that come up are yoga exercises. So that leads a lot of people to think, I wonder if yoga classes are the right thing to get my bulging disc sorted. Now, the problem with this is that the approach to this is actually very nuanced. And in any given yoga class, there's likely to be some exercises in there that do help it, but there are also likely to be another load of them that are going to make it worse. And knowing which one to do and which one to avoid can be difficult. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a foundational understanding of what we want to avoid when we do yoga, and which exercises or which yoga poses are no good for people with sciatica. And then that will help you choose ones that are better, because generally yoga is a good form of exercise. It does help with back pain. It's been proven to help with back rehab, and it does often help a lot with sciatica. It can reduce tightness and stiffness, but if you choose the wrong poses, you're going to make it worse. So let's talk about what we need to avoid. Really, there's 2 things when you've got a bulging disc that you want to avoid in any given yoga class or yoga pose. The first thing we want to avoid is lots of what we call spinal flexion. So flexing forward, bending at the spine like this, because if we bend forward, we put pressure on the front of the discs, and that can make a disc bulge worse. Now, the second thing we want to avoid is stretching the hamstring muscles. And the reason we want to avoid stretching the hamstrings is because it's very difficult to stretch the hamstrings without stretching the sciatic nerve as well. And if you end up stretching your sciatic nerve, you're going to irritate it at those points in the back where it's pinched between the disc and the rest of the spine. So if we stretch the sciatic nerve, it usually makes symptoms worse. And I often have people coming in who've got a bulging disc and they say, I'm stretching the leg loads, but it's still really painful, it won't go away. And if I tell them to stop stretching their hamstrings, quite often the pain improves. Now, the problem with yoga is a lot of poses stretch the hamstrings and involve spinal flexion. So we're going to talk about 5 of the ones that I would recommend you avoid, so you can choose better ones to do instead. Now, the first yoga pose to avoid when you've got a bulging disc in your lower back is the downward dog. And this is one of the most common yoga poses. It's a really good exercise for loosening up what we call the posterior chain, which is all of the muscles from your neck all the way down your back into your bum, and then all the way down the back of the leg, so the hamstrings and the calves. So the downward dog is a good exercise, but not when you've got a bulging disc. Unfortunately, it does both of the things we're trying to avoid. It does flexion of the lower back, and it also stretches the hamstrings. It's quite possibly the worst possible yoga pose that you could do when you've got a bulging disc. So avoid the downward dog, and you'll have less misery as a result. Now, the second yoga pose to avoid when you've got a bulging disc is the seated forward fold. Now this one, again, is quite self-explanatory. Anyone with a bulging disc and sciatica will probably hate this exercise anyway. But basically it involves sitting on the floor with your legs straight out in front of you, and you're bending forward at the waist and reaching for your legs, basically tucking your head down. Now this puts you in a position that we call in the profession the slump position, or a very extreme version of the slump position. And the slump is actually a test we use to try and aggravate the sciatic nerve to bring the symptoms on. So not a good stretch to be doing, because you're going to be dramatically stretching the sciatic nerve and the whole nervous system, and that's just going to aggravate a bulging disc and sciatica as a result. The third yoga pose to avoid when you've got a bulging disc is the triangle pose. Now the triangle pose doesn't quite stretch the back in the same way as the other two exercises we've mentioned so far, but it does put a lot of tension on the sciatic nerve. So when you're standing with your legs quite far apart, you'll be stretching the adductors on the inside, which shouldn't be too bad. But then as you start to go down to one side and reach for the toes, that's when the hamstrings start to get quite a dramatic stretch. You're also going to be putting a lot of pressure on one side of the spine. And what this can often do, if you do it in the wrong angle, is place enough pressure on one side of the disc to make the bulge come out the other side and make it feel worse, just depending on where the damage is in the disc. So we avoid the triangle pose as well, because it's got a high chance of aggravating the problem. The fourth yoga pose to avoid when you've got a bulging disc is the happy baby. Now the happy baby is a nice stretch for most people, and when you're lying down on your back, obviously you're nice and comfortable, and then your legs are up in the air, you hold your feet, you hold your toes, and then you extend your feet out towards the ceiling. Now obviously you're lying on your back, so that's pretty much okay for bulging discs, but as soon as you start to round your spine, even though you're not weight bearing, it's still going to put quite a lot of pressure on the front of the discs. Then added to that, we're now stretching the hamstrings again as we extend the knee, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the sciatic nerve as well. Not to mention, with the happy baby, you're pulling your toes back towards you as well, and the sciatic nerve runs all the way down to the toes, which means as you pull your toes back, it's going to aggravate that nerve too. So avoid the happy baby. There are better ways to stretch yourself off than to do that exercise, because it tends to aggravate bulging discs. And now the fifth yoga pose to avoid when you've got a bulging disc is the standing forward fold. And this is obviously very similar to the seated forward fold, but this time we're doing it standing. And what we try to do with the standing forward fold is keep the legs straight and then bend all the way down using the hips and the spine, and then hug the legs. Now you have to be very flexible to be able to do this, and you also need a happy sciatic nerve. So if you've got an active disc bulge which is aggravating it, you're not going to be very flexible, and you're not going to have a happy sciatic nerve. It's going to be very irritated. And this position is loading the discs, and it's making the disc bulge jab the nerve, and that is going to aggravate sciatica too. So those are the exercises I recommend you avoid. The other exercises in a yoga class tend to be okay, but my golden rule here definitely applies, and that's to avoid any exercise that makes your pain feel worse. Someone asked me the other day, they said, Will, you said that a herniated disc exercise, a great one is the cobra pose, but every time I do it, my sciatica gets worse. And yeah, the cobra pose is usually a good exercise for herniated and bulging discs, but for this person, it's not a good exercise because it's making their pain feel worse. So for that particular person, my advice would usually be to stop doing the cobra because it's not working and find something different. When you're doing bulging disc exercises, they should always be comfortable. If someone's given you something to do and it's making your pain worse, it is the wrong exercise. I don't care how much of a specialist that person is or how much they say this is the right exercise to do. If it's making your pain worse, it's not going to help. So that's my golden rule. I hope that makes sense to you. And most people who've had sciatica, they can understand that once they've made the sciatica feel worse, it takes a long time for it to settle, which is obviously counterproductive. So those are the 5 poses to avoid when you do your yoga class to help your bulging disc heal faster. The other exercises in the class are usually okay as long as they're comfortable. So I hope you manage to have a successful class, and I hope your bulging disc gets better soon. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to get more from me, you can always pick up a copy of my book. It's called Thriving Beyond 50, and you can find it on Amazon using the link below this video. It's got tons more stuff about back pain and sciatica in here. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next video.